Hi there, it's Tracy Kiernan from stepbysteppainting.net, and this acrylic painting tutorial is going to show you how to paint this. I call it Midnight Howl. So we have a wolf or a coyote howling at a crescent moon. I'm going to go over the materials that I use for this painting. So there's only 5 colors for this tutorial. There's Mars Black, Titanium White. I also use Phthalo Blue, Deep Violet, and Bright Aqua Green. As far as the brushes, I used a 3/4 inch flat wash, a number 8 round brush. I used this brush because it has a nice fine point to it. That's going to be helpful when we do the point of the crescent moon. A 12 bright brush. I used that brush for the cliff. I used a 4 round brush. That brush was used for the wolf. And a fan brush. I used a fan brush for the trees. I'm going to go ahead and show you the size of this fan brush. So this is about 1 inch wide. So I find that if the brush is too big, it's kind of a little bit more cumbersome to use when painting these kind of trees. So the smaller fan brush is a little bit easier to work with. So this one's about 1 inch wide, if that helps you find a fan brush that's about that size. We're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm using an 11 by 14 inch canvas, and the background of this painting is a radiating blended background. So we have bright center and dark outer parts. If you follow my tutorials, I do a lot of this kind of background where we have a bright center and it swirls out into a darker edge. It's just a really beautiful type of background, and there's so many different types of designs, especially if the background is sky. I'm going to do something a little bit different though to this background. Instead of painting all circles, I'm going to do kind of this textured stroke thing just to kind of make it look a little bit different. So I took that titanium white and started in the center, and I'm just kind of doing these textured type of strokes to form a circle. So what I mean by that is I'm taking that brush and I'm just kind of doing more angles versus more of a circular type of stroke. And that's going to be more evident when we start blending the other colors. But we're just doing this big white blob in the center of the canvas. I'd say it's about 6 inches wide at this point. It doesn't have to be exact, but a big area of white right in the center. And then we're going to grab a little bit of that aqua on our brush. So I just grabbed a teeny bit. You don't want to scoop up a lot. If you do that, blending is not going to be fun for you. This part of the sky is still bright, so we only want to introduce only little bits of this turquoise aqua color. But blending it, I'm doing this angled thing to get it to blend outwards. If that's a little more advanced for you, or if you don't like the angled stroke thing, you can definitely just paint in a circular direction to form these blended rings that kind of work their way outwards. But I am introducing little bits of turquoise in the center. I don't want my center to be pure white. There's going to be a crescent moon in this painting that's pure white. So if my center is pure white, the moon's not going to stand out. But we still want that center to be super bright and light. So a lot of turquoise or a lot of white mixed with a little bit of turquoise. And as we work our way outwards, we're blending, we're doing wet on wet blending, working this color. So I'm adding more of the aqua color to my brush, and I'm not really letting that white kind of, not really adding more white to it, so it's slightly darker as I work outwards. So I'm almost close to the edge of the canvas, but not quite. I want to start introducing my phthalo blue, but before I grab pure phthalo blue, I'm going to mix phthalo blue and aqua. In fact, about 3 parts aqua and 1 part phthalo blue, because phthalo blue is a very strong blue color. It's dark. It will take over fast if we add too much. So again, only introducing little bits of it so that we can get that aqua to blend to our phthalo blue. Those 2 colors blend very nicely together. It turns into this kind of teal color, blue-green color that's really pretty. And kind of the same thing, we're just kind of working this paint, blending. I'm getting those colors to blend by doing these kind of angled strokes. It also works if you just paint in a circular direction, working that transition zone where those colors kind of meet and blend together. So I'm not letting that phthalo blue get too close to the center. That center should be a light color, and our outer part should start getting really, really dark. If you look at the final result of this painting, you can see how dark it is on the edges of the canvas. It turns into that very dark blue and dark purple color. But right now we're still in the bright zone where we want to make sure that it's still kind of light, kind of a medium color at this point. I'm just going to continue to mix blue and aqua together. Taking this teal color, just blending it with that aqua. If you find that there's too much blue, you can always go in and grab more aqua and white on your brush and then get that to blend into the rest of the sky. And I would try not to get too frustrated with your sky. It's not really the focus of the painting. We just want to kind of follow the rule of thumb that the center part should be kind of bright, and that's going to give us some really beautiful contrast for our silhouette wolf that we'll paint later. But if your sky is not perfectly blended, that's okay. There's going to be plenty of other things in this painting that we're not really going to notice if your sky is messed up. So we're going to continue outwards, and as I get to kind of the closer to the edge, when I'm done blending that teal sort of color, I want to focus on getting more pure phthalo blue in there. So again, I am still kind of loading my brush in some aqua here, but that's just to get that blue to blend. And occasionally I'll grab some white. Titanium white helps to blend your colors as well. You just don't want to do too much titanium white at this point because it should be getting relatively dark. It's kind of up to you when you want to introduce your purple. If you want more purple in your sky, you can introduce it sooner. If you want more purple just on the edges, on the corners, you can wait until you just have the corners left of your sky to introduce it. So I'm going to introduce it now. I have pretty much my 4 corners left after this circular blob was painted of blended color. But when you introduce your purple, it's kind of the same thing. You want to make sure blue and purple together for the transition zone. And then it turns into more of a pure purple on the edges. And I'm still doing that angled thing. So you can see a lot of my strokes in there. So it's not perfectly smooth and rounded versus if I just painted all in circular strokes, it would be more rounded, but this one is more textured. So when that phthalo and purple mix together, it actually makes a even darker color. So just kind of be aware of that. So you don't want to introduce too much of that dark blue and dark purple closest to your center. So your center should still be very bright. So you can see how the edges are turning more of that purple color. I'm going to add more phthalo blue on my palette and then use that to blend the rest of that purple into the blue over here. So if you're blending and you find your brush is just overloaded with paint, it's always nice to have a towel kind of handy so you can wipe your brush off. I find that it's easier to blend paint when there's not a lot of paint on your brush. You're just basically using the brush as a tool to just kind of smudge the paint that's already on the canvas. So sometimes it's not helpful if there's too much paint still on your brush. So I'm just taking this lighter color and kind of blending it outwards a little bit further. And then in the center as well. In this next step, you don't have to wait for it to dry because we're going to be splattering little specks of stars. So I am using a toothbrush for this. I like to make sure the bristles of the toothbrush are just slightly wet but not soaking, and just kind of use my finger to apply the white paint to my brush. And that gives me a good consistency of white. You don't want it too thick and you don't want it too thin. You want it to just be the right consistency so that it splatters little fine white specks of paint in your sky to give it that starry look. For this next step, you do need to let this dry before we do this part. We're going to be drawing the crescent moon next, and it's kind of hard to draw on wet paint, so we need this to dry. I have a circle, so this is a little plastic bowl that I'm tracing, and I'm going to position it kind of the upper left area of the canvas. So our cliff is going to be down here, and our wolf is going to be overlapping our moon a bit. So I'm just going to kind of place it kind of in the upper left, upper right area of the canvas. And I'm going to go ahead and just trace it with a pencil. So this circle is 4.5 inches in diameter. You can use a compass or you can find something that's similar in size and then just trace the full circle. And then since this is a crescent moon, I'm going to take this and on the inside of that circle, I'm just going to sketch the inner part of that crescent shape so that it goes to a point. It goes to 2 points. If you want to find a smaller circle to trace for the inner part, you can, but I found it relatively easy to just kind of sketch that inner part. And then we want to go ahead and paint our crescent white. So this is the number 8 round brush that I'm using, and I like this brush because it has a nice little point to it for our little tiny corner tip of the crescent, both the little tips of this crescent. So I'm going to start by painting this entire moon white. So don't worry about the blending or anything else that's going to come in a later step. Right now we're just painting it solid white. I will say that we want to not let it dry, because after I'm done painting it white, I'm actually going to use my finger to smear the middle part to make it look like, give it that kind of whimsical faded look in the center part of the crescent, on the right edge of the crescent. So right now, just filling that shape in based on how I drew it with pencil. And then before this moon dries, we want to go ahead and take our finger and we want to smear the edge. So I'm just smudging and kind of stretching that wet paint that's already there, painting my finger in kind of a circular direction. So this is going to give it that sort of faded look on the edge of our crescent. It already looks like there's kind of a face on our moon right now. So just taking this, let it kind of fade off. Maybe a little bit gets extended further, but not too much. We don't want to lose the fact that this is a crescent shape, so we're not trying to make this into a circle. We're just giving it that whimsical sort of faded look. And then we can do a little bit of an advanced step. You don't have to do this if you like the way it looks. You can keep it as is. But I'm going to add a little bit of gray to this. So I added black to my palette and I mixed white into it. So a teeny bit of black with white to make kind of a light to medium gray. And this is still that number 8 round brush. And on the far left edge of this circle, I'm going to just kind of in a circular direction, kind of loosely outline the edge of that moon. So it's kind of gray and a little bit shadowy. And I'm just kind of taking my brush and sort of stippling the edge to kind of create these sort of crater look on the far left edge of that moon. We can add a little bit more if I want, but I don't want to mess this up and go too far and add too much gray into this. Maybe just a little bit more edging up here. It's not on the far edge because that far edge is still kind of that bright white color, so it's kind of the inner edge of that circle. And I'm going to leave it like that. I don't really want to mess with it too much further. And there is our whimsical crescent moon shape in our sky. The next thing we're going to do is draw out our cliff. I'm going to make 2 marks, one at the 5-inch mark at the bottom of the canvas and one at the 6-inch mark on the left. And this can and will be adjusted, so that's just kind of a guideline for now. This is a regular piece of chalk, and I'm just kind of taking this and loosely sketching this diagonal line for the right edge of the cliff. And then it kind of goes down. It goes relatively horizontal to the left, but then it has some form here, so it kind of goes up a little bit so we can see that top part of that ground area. So I'm just kind of loosely sketching what I want that shape to look like. There's a good amount of room on the right part of that canvas for trees to be painted, so it's not taking up the whole right part of the canvas. And then I'm going to use the 12 bright brush. So this is a little flat brush that's about a 1/2 inch wide. You don't have to use this exact size. In fact, you can use your 3/4 flat, the one that we used to paint the background. It would give the same kind of effect, but a flat brush is helpful for this. And basically, let's just start with the Mars Black and just start filling in the shape of the cliff. We only want to fill in this bottom part right now because that top edge is going to be a little bit lighter than this part of the cliff. This part is dark. So I'm just kind of loosely filling this in. Do angled, kind of wavy strokes. Right now we don't have any highlight or anything like that, so it's just a solid black shape. Before this dries, I'm going to introduce my white to it. So I just grabbed some white on my brush. This is going to turn a medium to dark gray very fast because there's still black on my brush, and that's okay. That's kind of what we want. We don't want this part to be white. We want it to be gray. So I'm just taking this and just kind of loosely filling this in with that medium gray color that I created using the black and the white. And I'm just filling in this top part of the ledge that's going to be naturally lighter because that moon is kind of reflecting that area right now. Get some more white on my palette, but just kind of use the tip of the brush to just loosely fill this in with just kind of short, sort of wavy strokes in there. The far edge of this cliff, the top edge is a little bit brighter, so I'm adding a little bit of extra white right on that edge. So white right there on the tip of your brush. And then loosely filling that in. When we get our coyote drawn and painted in, he is going to be casting shadows, but right now we're not adding any of those shadows in there. We're just painting this flat edge of our cliff. And then over here on the side of the edge, I'm taking that white and just kind of dragging it on the side. So it's a little bit bright on the edge and just kind of fades off. A little bright, kind of fades off. Using the tip of your brush to just kind of drag that color inwards. There might be some lighter color on the cliff as well. And then I can erase my chalk. So this did get adjusted. That bottom part where I said that was about 5 inches and ended up losing a little bit of that. So it's more like 4.5 to 4 inches, but it doesn't have to be exact. So my cliff ended up being a little bit smaller down there, and that's okay. And then some of the chalk drawing at the top I could erase as well. So the cliff didn't end up getting that high. And then adding a little bit of that white kind of in there gives it that texture in our cliff. And then I can carefully, I'm using a wet paintbrush to erase this chalk. You can also use like a baby wipe. The baby wipe usually works better because it'll lift off the chalk residue. When that dries, that chalk residue might still show up. So that's just something to keep in mind. And also just be really careful when you are erasing your chalk that you're not smudging any of the wet paint. So we are going to go ahead and move along to our trees next. So for the trees, I used that fan brush that's about 1 inch wide. And we want our Mars black paint. So I recommend, if you've never painted these fan brush trees, to practice this first before doing it on the canvas. But what I like to do is I load it into that paint, make sure all your bristles are kind of spread apart evenly, and also slightly watering that black down is really helpful for this. I used the corner of my brush to make a little mark, and that's going to be the very top of the tree. Now this can be helpful. It's completely optional, but if it helps, you can take a ruler and paint using a regular round brush. So this is the 8 round brush. You can paint a vertical line. So this can help you with your tree. And then you can take your brush. So our branches are really tiny at first, which means we're not using the full width of the brush at first. We're really just using the corner of it at first. So I hold it at an angle and make these little marks. And then I work my way down in kind of a zigzag formation using just the tip of the brush. I'm stamping just the tip of it. And I'm going left to right to left to right, forming that conical shape of the tree so the branches get kind of wider as we go all the way down. And I'm really pressing hard on that brush when I get to the bottom of that tree versus at the top I'm pressing relatively lightly at first. So I'll go ahead and do another tree, and I'm not going to use the ruler this time, but I'm going to do the exact same technique. So make a little mark for the top of the tree. Use just the corner of that brush at first because our branches are not that large up there. And then we're forming, going in a zigzag formation to form that shape. Right to left, right to left. I'm kind of curving these branches a little bit upwards. The way I'm holding my brush, I'm kind of going in like a inverted curved direction. So I'm going to do another one. This one's going to be smaller, little dot for the top. And then using just the tip, the corner, forming those branches, working my way down. And then we have a large tree that's on the top of the cliff. And I'm going to do the exact same thing, figure out where that top is. It's relatively high in the sky. I know my hand is covering at this point, but it's the same exact technique. Just using the tip of the brush. Working your way down. So this is going to get very branchy, very full down here. So I might need to reload my brush several times for these larger areas. But essentially I'm doing the same thing. Tapping it, forming it out. I'm going to go back and do a second layer on this tree to kind of redo its shape to make it a little bit more branchier. So if you wanted it to be not so branchier, you don't have to do multiple layers. I'll make a few more branches kind of sticking out. So in a later step, we're going to add a white layer kind of to highlight these trees, but we're not going to do that until this dries all the way. We're going to move along to our wolf. So you are welcome to download this template and use it to trace onto your canvas. You're also welcome to draw the wolf. So I'm going to go ahead and draw this wolf. I have it printed out to use as kind of a reference, and I'm using my fingers to kind of visualize the proportions of this. So the height of his legs are about the same height as his body area. That kind of helps to get the height of our wolf. And I'm going to start by drawing two circles. So I did kind of a regular size circle on the left and kind of more of an oval type of circle on the right. So that gives me kind of the shape of his body. And then I can connect those circles together by drawing kind of these two curved shapes. And that helps me kind of sketch where his tail, so his tail curves down and up. We're going to run into that tree with that tail, but that's okay. So kind of that tail shape. And then our legs, look at that shape and kind of sketch that down. Figure out where the bottom, where his feet are. So I did like a little horizontal line on that ledge where the bottom of his feet are going to be. This is his back hind leg that I'm sketching. And then we can sketch his second leg. So look at that negative space to see that kind of that curved shape. And then this shape is relatively the same kind of shape as that first leg. It goes down. It's kind of even with the other leg in terms of where it stops on the ground. The nice thing about this is it's a silhouette. So silhouettes are relatively forgiving in terms of shape because it's a shadow. So our eyes don't really perceive that as needing to be perfect because it is a shadow. And this one, same thing, it kind of goes down, just sketching each of these leg shapes using the template as a reference for my drawing. It's very sketchy, so I'm not holding my pencil down super hard for this. And then we have the head area. So our wolf is going to be howling, and we are overlapping our moon at this point, and that's okay. We anticipated on that happening. So I'm going to kind of sketch up and do his ear. Just a short, sketchy strokes to get this. His mouth. The bottom part of his mouth is not as long as that top part. Let's look at the proportion of that. So that's 3 head links. 1, 2, 3. And when I'm a little bit more confident with the drawing, I can go back and kind of make it darker. And then when we paint this in, we might find that we'll adjust our drawing as we paint it in, and that's okay. Again, it is a silhouette, so it is very forgiving with the drawing. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then, once we have our drawing in, we can go ahead and paint our wolf in. So I'm using the number 4 round brush and the Mars Black. It helps to add a little bit of water in there when painting these silhouettes in. Helps to get that paint to flow, and we can get it into more precise areas when it's not super thick. I'm just going to kind of go in the order that I did kind of with drawing. I didn't do the legs first, I did the body first, but I'm going to start with the legs. And again, just kind of sketch the outline of that. Take my time filling it in. Doing short, kind of sketchy strokes. Our tail, we can get that shape in. We can do a little bit of texture on the scale, on the tail. So some of those strokes are kind of going outwards to give it that kind of that feathery hair texture on the edges. And then basically my goal right now is just to paint the outline of the wolf to make sure my shape is fine, and then I will fill it in solid once I'm done painting the outline of it. Be very careful when you get to the mouth and head area because those little shapes and lines are a little bit more precise. You might find that using a smaller brush is helpful for that step, for getting those small areas. But when you're done with the outline of your wolf, you can go ahead and fill that in solid black. I don't think it matters the direction of your stroke, although I'm doing more of this like fur texture stroke. So going in kind of these contouring strokes, kind of going in the direction of that shape, but doing kind of more short, kind of curved strokes to give it a little bit of fur texture on the body. But we are going to add some fur texture kind of sticking out, and then we will also highlight this shadow silhouette with some white. Right now, let's just focus on getting it all solid black. To do that fur texture, you want to really focus on the tip of your brush to create these little tiny points. The 8 round brush might be helpful for this because it has a thinner point than this one, but I'm just kind of dragging that paint, the black, kind of outwards to create that fur edge. So that's going to give your wolf that texture, furry look on his edge. A little down here in his belly area. Do a little bit, it's not too much on the head area. We can do a little fur texture on his ear. He's too far away to where we wouldn't see his teeth or much of his nose, so you don't have to worry about that detail. The next thing we are going to do is add highlights to our wolf. This is an optional step. If you feel like it's too advanced, you can skip this step. But I'm just going to kind of make my silhouette look a little bit more advanced and not just a solid black shadow. So I'm taking my brush, I loaded a little bit of titanium white on my 4 round brush, and I'm just loosely adding white on the edges of the wolf, particularly on his back, the top of his head and the top edge of his ear. So imagine the moon is reflecting, and the front part that we see, that would not have a lot of highlights, but the edges would. We would see kind of the lighter edges of his fur. I just took a little baby wipe and kind of fixed that edge of the ear. I didn't like that the fur texture I did on his ear, so I just kind of wiped that off gently with the baby wipe. I'm just taking this white and just on the edges, adding a little bit of light texture down here as well. On his tail. But I'm not going too crazy with it. We would just see the white along the edges of the shape. A little bit down here. Again, if you don't like the look of this or if it's too advanced, you do not have to do this step. So we give our shadow a little bit more texture, a little bit of depth just by adding the little bits of white in there. I'm going to use my baby wipe to wipe off any of the chalk residue from drawing the cliff earlier. And then we have shadow underneath our wolf. So with this black, very loosely, I'm going to do left and right strokes from his shadow kind of being casted from the moon. Just kind of goes down in sort of a diagonal, little bit of a diagonal direction. It's mostly vertical down that cliff area. It just kind of fades off to the edge of the cliff. Very loose left and right strokes. It's not solid. And that gives it that shadowy look on the ground. Then I took this left part of our ground area and I wanted to make it look like this tree was a lot further back, kind of behind this sort of rocky area. So I lifted up that land a little bit higher, so it made it look like that was overlapping that tree a little bit more, so that tree is a little bit further back. And then I go ahead and rinse that brush, set it to the side. So our trees, let's go back and revisit our trees. We're going to add some white to the trees. So our goal is not to make it look like there's snow on the trees, but to make it look like that they have a little bit of highlight and dimension. So I loaded just a teeny bit of white on my fan brush and just on one side, so on the left side, you can do a little bit on both sides actually, adding a little bit of white to the edges of your branches. That's just going to give it a little bit of pop in that area, especially since that's such a dark area, but also gives it that highlight. The moon would be reflecting onto those tree branches. So I'm going to do the same thing to this one, just on the right. So you see that I'm not just painting over all of what I just painted black earlier, just adding a little bit of white on the edges of the branches, but still essentially the same technique, using the fan brush the same way, but just adding that color on the edges. So I'll go back and add it on the other side as well. So these trees kind of have it on both the left and the right. The upper tree, the tall tree on the left side of the canvas, only has the highlight on the right side of the branches. So this one down here, we can actually make it look like that one's overlapping just by adding that highlight. The last few things we're going to do to this painting are add a few stars in the sky. So we already splattered stars in the sky, but I want to add some twinkle stars just to give some more interest in the sky area. So to do that, this is my 8 round. I'm going to first paint the center part of those twinkle stars. So just with the white paint the little dot. Then I'm going to wipe off my brush. Kind of pinch the bristles. So before that paint dries, I'm using that tip of the brush and I'm dragging that paint down to create that twinkle star effect. So I'm just taking that wet paint from that dot I created, dragged it up and down to create a plus sign, kind of goes to a point on the edge, and you can do diagonal lines as well. That's just a little trick for painting those very detailed, intricate stars. If you have a white paint pen, I suppose you can use that for this step. And then I did a little shooting star. So I did a little circle, wipe the brush off, and then take that and drag it outwards. So it kind of fades off. And that is pretty much it. This is the conclusion of how to paint Midnight Howl, a night painting with a howling wolf. A couple other things you can do. You can add a few more stars if you want. Also, if there's any pencil lines still showing, you can go ahead and erase. So pencil lines from the moon and pencil lines from the wolf drawing, if you drew the wolf, you can just take a regular eraser and just kind of gently erase all of that. Just be careful not to erase too hard. You don't want to lift any paint or smudge any wet paint. But that's it. Thanks for watching, and thanks for painting with me.